Okay, take two. We have a very special guest with us here today. Dr. Juan is here to talk about some tips for applying to grad school. What's your full title over in the grad school, Juan?
Associate Dean for Graduate Studies.
Oh, wait, you are muted though.
I am?
No, wait, maybe I just can't hear.
Can you guys hear me? Okay, students?
Can anybody else hear?
I
I
can
can
hear
hear.
Dr. Casas.
All right. I apparently can't hear. So I'm going to sign out. I'll jump right back in, but I will turn it over to Juan. I made you a co-host, so you should be good to roll.
Okay.
This will take me like a minute, and then I'll be right back.
Sounds
So
good.
without further ado, let me turn it over to Dr. Juan, and I will be right back.
Great. Thanks, Beth. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the invitation to come and speak with all of you. I love these opportunities to come and this is a presentation, but I really want this to be super informal. And so as questions pop up, as I'm talking about things, please feel free to interrupt me. I can't actually see the chat right now, so just jump in and say that you have a question, and I guarantee that whatever question you have, probably somebody else in the call probably has the same question as well. So let's make it as conversational as possible. I also know, I believe Dr. Santo is, yeah, Dr. Santo is on the call as well. And so I want to invite Dr. Santo and Dr. Lyon to please jump in whenever they have additional comments that they want to share with the group as well. It's rare that you get these nice opportunities to talk with 3 faculty members with extensive experience about applying to graduate programs. So let's make the most of it together. So, sorry, one sec. See if I'm, oh, it's not letting me advance the slides. Beth, did you make me co-host, you said?
I did. I can do it again if need be. Are you having issues with getting something to show up or something?
It's not letting me advance the slides, so I can do it.
Let's see.
Oh, there we go. Got it. Okay, just got it. Okay, perfect. So, of course, you guys are all here because you are, I'm guessing, either members of Psychi or one of Dr. Santo's students, or maybe both. And so you probably are thinking, or may in the not too distant future be thinking about what you want to do when you finish your undergraduate career. And so you have a lot of different paths that you can take at that point, graduate school being one of them. And so that's really what this talk is all about, is to get you thinking about the kinds of things that you can do if you think that particular trajectory is the one that you will be following. Because what I see is that there are oftentimes a lot of students who are thinking about graduate school, but they are really sort of focused and have a tunnel vision about trying to jump through all the hoops that they need to get through to finish their undergraduate degree, that they oftentimes miss out on opportunities that exist as undergraduates that can make you a much stronger applicant for graduate programs. And so I want to make sure that you're thinking about what it entails when you are applying to graduate programs, but also about those opportunities that you might be able to take advantage of as you're moving through your undergraduate career and thinking about your post-graduation plans. So why do I want to go to graduate school? Well, you really should be highly motivated to attend. Grad school, not unlike undergrad, is not easy. You have to work really, really hard to be able to work and move your way successfully through those programs. So you should have a high degree of motivation to really not only apply to, but attend and move your way through those programs. So you really should see this as an important part of achieving your career and professional goals. So when you ask yourself, what is it that I want to do day in and day out for the rest of my life? What is it that gets me excited and that I would be motivated to do? Then you can almost work a little bit backwards and say, okay, if that's what I want to do, what kind of a degree do I need to be able to work in that particular sector or that particular area? And then what kind of educational opportunities do I need to make sure that I take advantage of to make sure that I have the credentials that I need when I finish to be able to find employment working in those areas that really excite me. A lot of people around this time are also thinking about, does it make sense for me to take some time off between undergraduate and graduate school? And I don't know that there is a perfect answer for that. I think it's highly individual. But I will mention just a few things. One is, and I know not everybody is thinking about graduate school maybe in psychology. Maybe many of you guys are. I hope many of you guys are. I love the field. But it's possible that some of you guys are thinking in other directions as well. So one question you might want to ask yourself is, does your program like to see work experience before you actually apply to graduate programs? So I do this kind of talk for more general audiences too. And the example that I always use is if you're thinking about your MBA, so your master's in business administration, MBA programs really like to see people have work experience prior to applying to graduate programs. And so that's a case where it really would make sense for you to finish your undergraduate career, get some relevant work experience, and then think about applying to those kinds of programs. So it'll depend. I don't know that that's necessarily true for many graduate programs in psychology. I think we can often work with the kinds of experiences that you have to date as you work your way through not just your undergraduate degree, but through the different life experiences that you might have leading up to that time. Do you feel burned out? Are you like, I made it to the finish line, I have my undergraduate degree, but I am exhausted. I think I need some time out to sort of recharge my batteries before I start a graduate program. And if that's the case, then it may make sense for you to take a little bit of time out. Obviously, finances are always an issue whenever you're going to embark on any educational program, undergrad or grad. And so you have to think, am I in a good position financially to be able to begin a program and work through my program without having to start and stop? It's possible that depending on the program that you're applying and the record that you've compiled, that you may be able to get a scholarship or maybe a graduate assistantship. And so that certainly makes the financial part of it a bit easier. But it's still always going to be a consideration whenever you're thinking about educational programs. And then will waiting make it less likely that you come back to school? So sometimes it makes sense to take some time off, but sometimes people find employment and then they never come back to graduate school. And if you know that that's something that's important to you, and you know that it's important to achieving your professional and career goals, then maybe you want to think twice before taking some time off. Okay. So what matters most? This is by no means an exhaustive list, but it is a lot of the things that you'll see that programs ask for. And so you'll see things like, obviously, what is your cumulative GPA? What are the kinds of courses that you've taken? What's the rigor of the course selections that you've made? For standardized tests, whether it's the GRE or the LSAT or the GMAT or whatever is appropriate in your case, those scores are also going to factor into this picture. Letters of reference. Most of the time, those are going to be letters of reference from faculty, but sometimes it could be work supervisors, for example, that know you well and know the kind of work that you've done that's relevant to the program that you want to apply to, and maybe can speak to your character and your determination as well. Research experience, work experience, volunteer experience, if it's relevant, those are certainly things that you're going to want to make sure that you include as part of your application. And I'll talk more about all of these in just a little bit. Most programs will also require an application statement. This is usually 1 to 2 pages, where you are essentially putting your best foot forward and making the case for why you think you would make a good student for the program that you're interested in applying to. And then many programs in psychology, for example, we often will ask for writing samples because we want to see a little bit about your technical writing. So you may have to do that as far as the GRE goes when you're doing the writing component of the GRE, but we also like to see technical writing in psychology. And so we like to know what your APA style writing is like. And so oftentimes programs will ask for a writing sample from one of your courses, or if you're doing research, maybe from a research paper or a publication if you have it. But the point is that they want to get a sense of how well you're writing, because that is a huge part of what we do in graduate school. I will say a couple of other things. One is that, especially more recently, I think a lot of programs are taking holistic approaches. So a lot of students sometimes will say, gosh, I didn't get the best GRE score, and so I'm worried that I'm not going to be able to get into a particular program or to any program. And what I like to say is that because more and more programs are taking this holistic approach, that that means that they are sort of taking into consideration sort of your whole body of work that you're presenting as you are thinking about applying to the program. Sorry, I'm going to check the chat room. Oh, okay. So it does look like it's being recorded. And then to answer Melissa's question, I'm assuming, Beth, this can be available for people to see later? Okay, perfect.
Yeah, this will be posted on our Canvas page in one of the modules.
Okay, perfect. So going back to that holistic approach, it means that not doing well in any one area doesn't mean that they aren't going to consider other strengths that you might have across these other things that are going to be asked for as part of the application process. Having said that, there are some programs that will do sort of strict cutoffs. So you may encounter some programs that will say, we're looking for a minimum GPA of X, or a minimum GRE score of this, or a combined GRE score of this. And so you still will see some of those. If you don't hit those cutoffs, move on and start considering other programs, because oftentimes the people who are considering those applications will never even see them. There's oftentimes professional staff that are working their way through the applications and doing sort of a first pass to make sure that people are hitting whatever requirements they've established. And so you want to make sure, if they specify cutoffs, that you're hitting those cutoffs, okay? But by and large, I think the trend in more recent years is really towards this more holistic approach to considering people's applications. So let's take a quick peek at each of these application components and say a little bit more about each of them. We'll start with your classes and GPA. So you do want to take as much coursework in your major and related courses as possible. And of course, you want to do well in those courses. You want to demonstrate that you can do well in psychology courses, and that's hopefully predictive of the kind of success that you would have as a graduate student in the field. Um, so when you think about electives, this is something I tell the advisees I have, that when you think about electives, you do want to think about courses that are going to help to build your foundation in psychology and in the area that you're interested in developing for graduate school. So if I was, let's say, interested in neuroscience and behavior type programs, then I would want to take, in addition to psychology courses, maybe additional courses in biology or in chemistry, but courses that are really going to give you a good footing, not only as you apply to programs, but as you start to take those programs as a graduate student, you'll have the background that you need to hopefully be more successful in those areas. So I always tell people, think long term in your course selections. Think about what's going to help you down the road, not just in the short term or in that particular semester. I do hear students sometimes say, and I believe I probably said this as an undergraduate too, that there were certain classes that if I didn't have to take them, I wasn't going to take them because they were just super hard classes, or they had a professor that had a reputation for being really tough. Don't avoid hard classes or tough professors if they are courses especially that make sense in building that foundation that I've referred to. You really want to prepare yourself as best as possible. So think carefully about the selections that you make. Obviously, at UNO, there are a lot of required courses that you have to take, but there's also a lot of choice that you have, even within meeting, let's say, the area requirement, where you have to take one course in 4 out of 5 areas. You still have some opportunity to have some choices with respect to the courses that you can take. So within those area courses, maybe you start thinking about which are the area courses that I could take that would be most relevant to what I hope to do, or the type of program that I hope to apply to. So do make the most of your electives. If you don't speak regularly with your advisor, please do make that a habit. There's a lot of information that you can get from DegreeWorks, but there's really no substitute for it. So please do check regularly with your advisor. GPAs do matter. They're one of the criteria that programs use to select students. All programs will ask for your cumulative GPA as an undergraduate, but some programs may ask for other GPAs as well. So some programs will say, especially as you've transitioned to sort of being a junior and a senior, they want to know for your last couple of years, when maybe a lot of students are more serious about what they hope to do as they are finishing off their undergraduate curriculum, what your GPA is in your last couple of years. And some programs will ask for your GPA in your major. So you may have to report your overall undergraduate GPA, and they may say, okay, what's your GPA for psychology courses? And you can report that. So you want to make sure that not only are you doing well across your courses, but you're especially doing well in those last few years and in the courses that are part of your major and a part of what you would be applying to for graduate programs. Does someone have a question? No? Okay. We'll keep plugging along. So what should I do if you want to get into graduate school? It's really, and this is honest to God's truth, it's never too early to start preparing. It's never too early to start researching programs, start learning about what different programs can offer you, start learning about what different programs require. because they can often shape the kind of classes that you take and the kind of experiences outside of the classroom that you want to take advantage of so that you can put your best foot forward and put as strong an application as you can. So one of those things that I like to recommend to students is um, really try to get to have a good understanding of what grad school is like. And you can obviously talk to professors about what grad school is like, but if you get involved in research, you also have a great opportunity to speak with students who are graduate students who are currently in the midst of it. And they can tell you about what it's like to take graduate courses as opposed to undergraduate courses and the kind of work that you're required to do as a part of the program. So take advantage of those opportunities to speak to graduate students. And then because you're thinking about applying to graduate programs, if there are undergraduate students who maybe are a year or 2 years ahead of you who are in the process of applying to graduate programs, those also make a good part of your informal network, and they can share what's worked well for them, what hasn't worked well for them. And those are good things that you can bounce off of professors too. But obviously you do want to get to know your professors really well, not just because informally they can share a lot of really good information with you, but because at the end of the day, you're going to have to ask for some letters of reference. And so you want to establish a good connection, a good relationship with professors as much as possible. So we'll say more about this when we get to the letter of reference component, but you have the opportunity to get to know professors in one easy way, which is coming to office hours. Believe it or not very many students come to office hours, at least not as many as we would like. And so we by no means are rock stars, but I always like to draw the comparison to office hours being like a backstage pass. And you would never probably not use a backstage pass if you had the opportunity to do so. You have that opportunity to do so. In fact, you really are very deserving of that time to be able to chat with us about what's going well in the class, maybe what you're struggling with, what your future career plans are, because you're paying for those classes. And so you have the right to want to be able to talk with faculty as much as possible. So I would encourage you to really seek out those office hours, and if they're willing to maybe talk outside of office hours, if office hours don't work well for you because it overlaps with a class or overlaps with your work schedule, most faculty I find are pretty accommodating, and the point is that you want to get to know your professors really well so that if they do write a letter of reference for you, they can say a lot more than just that you were in your class. That you were in their class, excuse me, and that you got a really good grade. That's terrific. That's something we always strive for. But the more they can talk about us in multiple contexts, the stronger those letters of reference are. And again, if you're working or you're volunteering, try to make it a work and volunteer experience that is relevant to the programs that you're interested in applying to. So it's a fact of life. We need to bring in some dollars so that we're able to pay tuition, pay for our books, pay for other things that we need. But if you have to work, instead of, say, I'm just throwing this out there, waiting tables, for example, that maybe isn't going to get you that much good experience relevant to the programs that you're interested in. Why not seek out opportunities at, say, Boys Town, or seek out opportunities at UNMC in some of the clinics that they have? There are a lot of opportunities in town with different organizations. Some of them are volunteer experiences, but a lot of them are paid experiences. And so if you have to work to earn money for your studies, which again is a fact of life for most of us, then make it count. make it count for you in terms of helping you pay your bills, but also as you move forward, being something that you're able to claim when you do go apply to graduate programs. The other thing that I listed here is that there are a lot of opportunities on the research front to build your credentials. So you can ask different faculty about their research. Actually, if you go to the psychology main page and you click on the faculty, it'll show you our research and our teaching interests. And so it's okay for you to send out emails that say, you know, Dr. Casas, I saw that you're doing work on kids' social development. That's something that really interests me, and I want to get some experience before I go to graduate school in the research area. Are you by chance looking for research assistants right now? And I may say yes, I may say no, I may say, you know what, I have a full team right now, but come next semester, I'll be looking for some research assistants, and so I would love it if you got back to me and we discussed what might be an opportunity that would be available to you then. Or I might say, you know what, my team's full, but I know that Dr. Santo is often looking for students, and so why don't you think about contacting him? He does research that's very similar to mine, and so on. Okay, so don't be shy about reaching out to faculty and asking them about their research programs, asking them what kinds of opportunities might exist for you. And these FUSE grants, I don't know how many of you guys have heard about these FUSE grants. I'm going to click on this and see if you guys are able to access it or not. Let's see. Oh, there it is. Can you guys see that? No? Okay. Well, FUSE grants are essentially faculty mentored research experiences. And sorry, I'm going to just close this out now. And you have the opportunity to actually get paid for doing research. It's not a ton of money. The cap is $2,500 that you can use either for research expenses or actually to sort of pay yourself a salary for completing research with a faculty mentor. And so there are ways for you, if you're finding it tough, to sort of go back on some of your work hours, but you still want to get some of that research experience. There are different opportunities like these FUSE grants that are really nice resume builders and provide some support for getting some of that research experience. Okay, as far as the GRE or LSAT or whichever exam would be appropriate for you, it is true that almost all programs require them. Not everyone does, but most programs require them. If you're thinking about psychology, most programs require the general GRE. Some programs may require the psychology GRE, but lately it seems like fewer and fewer programs are requiring the psychology GRE, but just about everybody is requiring the general one. So that one you definitely are going to want to focus on. It is not the be all and end all, as I mentioned earlier, but it is important. It's like your GPA. You want it to be as high as possible. People often ask about the timing of taking the GRE. One of the things I tell my advisees is, you know, one really good strategy I've found is if you think about spending the summer between your junior and senior year, really studying hard for your GRE, like as if it was a class where you aren't interrupted, you're putting the phone away, and you are really preparing as best you can over those summer months, and then taking the GRE early in that fall semester, that usually will help to boost your score as much as is possible. But it also does another thing, which is that it gives you usually enough time for you to retake the GRE if you think that you can boost your scores before actually applying to graduate programs. In other words, before you hit the deadlines for those graduate programs during your senior year. So don't wait until the last minute, because then you won't have that opportunity. Do take into consideration whether programs are doing super scoring. That is something that more programs are doing. They're doing it at the undergraduate level with ACT, SAT. Institutions are, but programs are also doing it a bit more with respect to graduate applications. So super scoring, when you take the GRE multiple times, let's say that you score a 150 on the verbal the first time you take it, and you do, well, let's just for ease, let's say you do a 150 on the quantitative, and let's say you score a 4 on the analytical. If the next time you take the exam, you score a 140 on the verbal, and you score a little bit higher on the quantitative portion of it, if a program is doing super scoring, what they would do is take the highest score across the different tests that you've taken and consider that essentially your best GRE scores that they would consider when they're reviewing your application. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. So that's what super scoring refers to. The general GRE has those three components, not unlike like the SAT or ACT when you took it to portion. And the analytical writing component is scored from a 0 to a 6, and they are in half-point increments. But a few other tips as far as GRE and other entrance exams go. You do want to budget for it, so you want to think ahead because they do cost money. They change, the price changes obviously from year to year, but especially if you think you might be retaking it at some point, you want to make sure that you budget for that. I have here Buy an Exam Prep Book, but the truth is that nowadays ETS, Educational Testing Services, which runs the GRE, actually puts quite a bit of free resources on their website. So if you haven't checked the GRE website before, and you're getting close to that time, please do check the ETS GRE website, because you will find some, I think they have 2 old exams, actual GRE exams that you can take and review and see how you're scoring. They have some other hints and tips and things. There's obviously extra things that they're happy to sell you, but take advantage, if nothing else, take advantage of the free stuff that they offer to you. But there are books of the sort that you can see in that picture there that are also prep guides for GRE or LSAT or GMAT, whatever the case may be, that also have old exams, that also have hints, that also have tips, and they're usually, I would say, around 40 bucks or so. And so I think the more you can get of that, the better. There are classes that you can take too. They usually are pretty expensive. And so that would be another thing that you would want to check into and budget for if you think that that's something that you would want to take advantage of. Sorry, I'm not seeing I just saw that another question came through. Beth, can you see the questions? I'm not seeing them right now.
Yeah, Hannah is lucky. She said one of the programs waived the GRE due to COVID for her applications. And I also wrote into the chat, which was the last thing that you saw go through, just your mention of free GRE prep materials, and especially free practice tests. Those are like the best resources for you to score higher on the GRE, is actually taking practice tests. So if you can get your mitts on practice tests, take them, take all of them, take all the free ones that you
Yeah.
can find, even if they're years old. The questions are framed in a similar way. So that's
Yep.
an awesome tip.
Yeah. And you know what? They're also very instructional too. So when you take those old exams, you often will identify the places where you're scoring well and the places where maybe you need to do a little bit of review to be able to boost your score. And so those old practice tests are really helpful for that too. If you guys are going to be taking time off between graduation and graduate school, make sure that you think about taking the exam while your undergraduate material is still fresh in your head. So if you take it 3 years down the road, I promise you there are things that you will forget. And so it's worth knowing that those scores, if you take them, are valid for multiple years. I believe, actually, I know that they're currently valid for 5 years at the moment. That might change into the future, but that's a pretty good window if you think you're just going to take a year or two off before applying to graduate programs and you still want your best GRE scores to count. So they are valid for multiple years. So do think about that before too much time has elapsed between completion of your undergraduate degree and maybe taking these entrance exams. Okay. As an undergraduate, one of the things that is really helpful in identifying the programs, even if you've already sort of said, okay, I now know I want to do developmental, or I want to do school, or I want to do cognitive psych. There are a few things that I do recommend. Obviously, there are all kinds of rankings that if you just do a Google search, they'll rank programs for you. But I really think what's important is thinking about the kind of expertise that you want to develop um, during your graduate training. You get one crack at your graduate training, so you want it to be the training that is most focused and provides the best experience for the kind of work that you want to do on the back end. So you do want to consider the professors that are a part of those programs and what their specific areas of expertise are. Look also at what recent research has addressed, because sometimes, especially for older faculty like me, lots of gray hair, sometimes research interests will shift a little bit over the years. And so you want to make sure that you're tapping into the work that they are most likely to be doing in the last couple of years. Make sure that they're still active and make sure that they're still there. So you might be seeking out some professors because you do lit searches, which I actually recommend. So if you want to find somebody who works with kids who are on the spectrum or other populations, then you should actually think about looking at very recent papers on those topics to help identify faculty who are working in those areas. But just know that sometimes faculty will shift from institution to institution, so you just want to make sure that they're still there. You also want to make sure that they are actually the faculty member, because sometimes the first author may be a graduate student, for example. So you want to do a little bit of your homework and make sure that the programs that you would be considering actually have the faculty that are there. It's helpful if there are faculty, more than one faculty member who's doing research in your area of interest. So if someone leaves midway through your graduate training, there are other folks that you could potentially work with. That actually happened to me. I started out at the University of Illinois. The faculty member that I was working with left after 3 years. And so fortunately, she was able to take some of her past students, and so I was able to move with her. But there really wasn't a lot of other people that had the same area of expertise at that time. And so it would have been a bigger problem if that wasn't the case, that I wasn't able to move with them. So if there are more than one professor doing work in their area of interest, all the better. But you want to look at things and ask a lot of questions. Is it a quality program, which you can determine in a number of different ways, but you want to look at graduation rates. You want to look at where the alumni from those programs are getting jobs. You want to look at the average time to degree, and so on, where faculty members are, like, in terms of how active they are. You can also get some information from faculty here at UNO about the places where folks maybe are publishing or where they're presenting. Have they heard of this person before? There's a lot of different ways of getting a notion of what a quality program would look like. Look at what they're emphasizing. Obviously, one important thing is asking, is there potential funding for me? Some programs, especially the larger programs, will fund every student or nearly every student that's a part of their graduate program. But a lot of programs can't do that, and so you have to start looking for alternative sources of funding, sometimes through graduate assistantships, sometimes through scholarships, sometimes through positions on campus that might have a tuition waiver for it and some pay associated with it, but you have to look. Is the program accredited? That's important, especially for clinical type programs. You want to make sure that those are accredited programs. And then take into consideration things like, this shouldn't be a deciding factor, obviously, which is why I put in the sort of joke comic. But you do want to consider it because the faculty in those programs, their best connections are oftentimes with organizations and other employers in those areas. And so they are oftentimes very helpful in helping you find employment if they can, once you finish, by directing you to different possible employers. And so that doesn't mean that wherever you go to graduate school, you'll finish living there and having a career there, but it is a consideration. So it's just something to think about. It's not the be-all, end-all by any stretch of imagination, but it is a consideration. But then this last point, talk to your UNO professors. They are a great source of free information. Ask them. They are usually very, very happy to speak with you and pass on whatever information they have about not only applying to graduate programs, but what different faculty members might be like, what different programs might be like, and so on. As an undergraduate, again, you want to consider the kind of program that you want, the kind of degree that is needed for the kind of work that you're interested in doing. And then you're going to want to do some reaching out. So you're going to want to contact the programs of interest. There's obviously nowadays a lot of information that you can find on the web. And so that's obviously a great place to start, but it's still worth reaching out to them, maybe speaking to the graduate program director, because they can sometimes give you information that isn't posted there or that has changed since they posted and it isn't up to date. So there's good information that you can find out from reaching out. The other benefit of reaching out is that you can make your application stand out or pop a little bit more. So if you're contacting professors that you might be interested in working with, I know personally, when I get those kinds of emails, I not that I read it any more careful than I would any other application, but I do consider the fact that this is somebody who's taken the time to reach out to me, who clearly has very similar interests to mine and could make a potential good student within not just our program, but within our lab. And so it's also a good way of learning things that might make you change your mind. You can ask about funding possibilities. You can just make sure that you are 100% sure of what the required application materials are. And I always encourage the students that I work with, talk to the professors or the graduate program director about speaking with current graduate students in those programs, And the nice thing is those graduate students, they have no vested interest in you coming to that program. And so not that we would lie, we wouldn't lie. We would tell you what we think the program is like. But graduate students usually can give you a really nice picture, a different perspective, right? Somebody who's in the program and can tell you what it's like, not just to be in that program. They can also tell you what it might be like to work with a certain professor. And that's really helpful information as you think about where you might apply, or if you get accepted to multiple programs, information that might be helpful as you consider sort of saying, okay, well, I have this piece of information that makes me think maybe the chemistry might not be the greatest with this particular professor, so maybe I should lean more towards this program. Or maybe that's just a red flag and I want to see if I can collect some more information. So it is good to reach out to those programs and to collect as much information as possible. We're usually thrilled to be able to speak to potential applicants and tell you as much as we can about our programs, because we want to build up as big of an applicant pool as we can. So it's always good to do that. Letters of reference. So again, we've sort of talked about this a little bit. Letters of reference, programs usually will ask for 3 letters of reference, but you might identify some programs that will ask for up to 5. I've never seen, I don't think, a program that's asked for more than 5 letters of reference. I would say 3 is the most common, but 3 to 5 is like the typical range that you might get. Again, where you can work with professors on research, where you can get to know them outside of just the classroom experience, all of that is really helpful, because that means that we're in a better position to write a stronger letter of reference for you. And ultimately, that's what you'd like at the end of the day when you're submitting all of your materials. I do recommend that you ask the professor not just if they can write a letter of reference, but whether they would feel comfortable writing a positive letter of reference. And if there's any hemming or hawing, or if there's any delay in their answer of yes, I'm happy to write a letter of reference for you, a positive letter of reference for you, then think about who you might want to ask outside of that particular professor. But you do want to start identifying them soon. Think about the ones that you've had the best relationships with, that you've gotten to know the best. When you do ask for letters of reference for programs, usually I say 3 to 4 weeks is an appropriate amount of time in terms of the deadline dates for submitting those letters of reference. And so make sure that you're giving them an appropriate amount of time. If you're saying, I need it for 3 days from now, that's not going to put us in the best mood for writing a letter of reference for you. So you want to make sure that you're giving appropriate amounts of time. But also talk to them about your interest in graduate school. So why is it that you're driven to apply to graduate programs? Why are you interested in certain programs in certain areas? Talk to them about your commitment to attaining a graduate degree, because it's important for the kind of work that matters to you, that interests you when you think about a career. And then provide them with other pieces of information too. I usually will ask if they have a statement, that 1 to 2 page statement. If they have it, great. If not, they can always share it with me later. But it's helpful for me to read what kind of information you're providing to graduate programs as well. You do want to provide a resume or a vita with all of your relevant accomplishments and experiences, because those are things that I will comment on. I may not know how you did in a certain job, or how you did with a certain volunteer experience, or if you worked with a different research professor on their projects. I may not know that, but I can comment on the fact that you sought out those experiences, that you have research experience on X, Y, or Z. that you have work experience because of where you worked with maybe diverse populations, and that's relevant for somebody who wants to be a school psychologist or a clinical psychologist and so on. So I do pay a lot of attention to the resumes that are shared with me, and I try to comment on those things as appropriate to sort of make the letter as strong as possible. Make sure they know what schools you're applying to and the deadlines that are attached to those schools. Um, the last point here, it says any forms that need to be completed. That just shows my age, because nowadays, most of the times you're applying online, and those programs will then send letters, or excuse me, emails to the faculty saying that you've applied to a certain program and they've requested a letter from this professor. So, but it's still good for them to know the deadlines and the programs that you're applying to, because sometimes the emails that you get sent are very sort of broad, and we get asked for a lot of letters, and so sometimes it's not always clear to me which program did they apply to, and so it just saves a step if I have all of that in one place.
I have a question.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, Erica?
Yeah, what's a good practice when it comes to following up with those people that you've reached out to for references, just to make sure that they've not only received it, but they're working on it? You know, I don't want to harass people.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. Obviously, this is important for completing your file for application. So it is okay for you to follow up, but I wouldn't ask and then a week later be asking, did you do it? Did you do it? Did you do it? So I would wait a couple of weeks, and then if you see that it hasn't been submitted yet with your other application materials, it's okay to send. Just wanted to send you a friendly reminder. I have an application that's due X date. I really appreciate you sending or completing a letter of reference for me for this program, and maybe you can just put in a reminder for some of the other programs. But certainly, I think that would be appropriate. Maybe once really close to the deadline date if they haven't done it yet, but again, also in friendly terms. I would say that the key is friendly reminders without bordering on the pestering, because then that's no fun either. But it's important, and so it's okay for you to send us friendly reminders. I appreciate the friendly reminders. If I already have it planned, I can just say, great, I'm on it. Haven't forgotten about it. I'll make sure I get it in by the date. If I had completely forgotten about it, then good for you for sending that to me. Okay. Beth, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, just to always on the student end of things, make sure that you do things in sort of the right sequence. So a lot of times you'll be filling out your application online. It'll ask you for who's going to write your letters for your referees, basically. And make sure that you've contacted those faculty members before you put their name down, because it is a little bit jarring when you haven't heard from the student at all and you get this form in your email that says, like, you're writing a letter for this student, and you're like, that student hasn't talked to me in years. So just make sure that you actually reach out to the faculty member first, because more often than not, they are going to say yes. They would be happy to write a letter for you. But if it ends up being the case that you just assume that they're going to, then it's a little bit like, well.
Yeah.
The only other thing that I would say for Erica's question, how I always approached it was, once I finished all of the stuff that I had to do for the application and I hit submit on my stuff, I would send my letter writers, if they hadn't submitted their stuff yet, and just say, like, I finished my application for LSU. Just a reminder, the letters are due by X date. Thanks again, blah, blah, blah. And I would send that, like, if I was applying for like 5 different schools, every time that I did one of the applications and I finished everything that I had, I would send a letter to letter writers an email and let them know, hey, I just finished another application. This one was due on this day. Like, thanks again, blah, blah, blah. So it kind of keeps them up to date in the process of where you're at in completing everything. And it also guarantees then that you've put in your application, so it's not the case that you've changed your mind and the letter isn't going anywhere.
Yeah, that's really great advice, Beth. That is really important. The other thing is you have to be careful too, because sometimes they won't send the email to the letter writers asking for a letter until you've submitted your application. And so sometimes if you wait till the last minute to do that, then we don't get the ask for the letter, the formal letter of ask, until closer to the deadline date. We should already be aware of it because you've already spoken with us. As Beth said, the order matters and the time to give the letter writer matters. But just be aware of that, and certainly you don't want to depend on that for informing them for the first time that they are going to be writing a letter for you. That is never a good strategy. So just give special consideration to who you're going to ask, and make sure that you're asking them with adequate time, and then some friendly reminders along the way. Okay.
One other question just to verify that what I said is true. Ray asked in the chat, if you're applying to multiple places, is it too much to ask a professor to write letters for more than one school? My understanding is always that if you ask them to write letters for you or to write a letter for you, they are happy to write for as many places as you're applying to. I mean, assuming you're keeping it reasonable, you're not applying to like 500 different schools and programs, that they would be happy to help you out with all of them. That's always been my experience, but if you want to speak on that.
Nope, Beth, that's always been my experience as well. So if I say that I'm willing to write for a student, that means I'm willing to write for that student for X number of programs. Yeah, wherever they happen to be applying, and if it does mean that sometimes after you've spoken with me that you've added a program or two, that's okay. Just let me know so that I have that information. But I think as a general rule, John, you can correct if you've had a different experience, but I think as a general rule, you can pretty much expect if you've asked someone and they've confirmed that they're willing to write for you, that means they're willing to write for you to all of the programs that you're applying to.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. No, and usually with the letters, we mention the name of the school that the student's applying to. You know, we recommend this student for admission to the University of Nebraska, and so it's a small ask to just tailor each letter ever so slightly for the number of schools that the student's applying to.
And the one thing I want to say, though, that's on our side. You don't want, I don't think it works, and it's not as effective if you are taking your research statement, or excuse me, your application statement, that 1 to 2 page sort of cover letter, and you are sending it to all of the institutions that you're applying to. Insert name of institution here at the outset. That is not a good way of applying to programs. You really want to tailor those letters to the programs that you are applying to, and you really want to make a convincing case that you have done your homework and that you understand the kind of training that they provide. You know which faculty are there in that program, and you realize that you, or at least you believe that you are a good fit for that program. Because that's really one of the things that we look for, is how well does this student match with the kind of training that we can provide. So we may have a student with a perfect 4.0 GPA with super high GRE scores, but if they've applied to our developmental program and they say they're interested in clinical developmental program, that will go almost automatically into the reject pile, because actually it will go automatically pretty much into the reject pile, because even though they may have higher GPAs and GREs than other students that we accept, we don't offer child clinical training. We have no child clinical faculty. So we're not doing that student any favors. We're certainly not doing the program any favors. And so it's a big time investment for the student and for the programs. It's a resource investment on both parts. So you want to make sure that you can really make a convincing case that you have done your work and you understand and believe that you are a good match for what your goals are, the people who are a part of those programs, and that you're a good match for that. Okay. So applying to graduate programs, again, make sure that you get to know the requirements, know them well, maybe work backwards to make sure that you can supply everything that you need and that you meet those requirements if they do happen to have cutoffs, as well as the deadlines. Most programs, I would say, are probably in the mid-December and January, maybe early February, in terms of deadlines, at least within psychology, but that can vary a little bit from program to program. So you just want to make sure that you have a good calendar where you have sort of charted out what all of the different programs that you're applying to require and when their deadline dates are, so you don't miss anything. It's a lot. It's just one more big thing to manage, but it's an important thing because it is your next important step in your training. So you want to make sure that you invest the time and do that process well. I think I've mentioned budgeting ahead of time before, but you do want to budget because it can be expensive to apply to graduate programs, just like when you were thinking maybe about applying to undergraduate institutions. There are application fees, obviously the standardized testing fees. Sometimes you want to visit campuses if you can. That's obviously tougher in this current environment. And you can do that virtually to a certain extent, but where you can, there's going to be extra fees for that. If they require an interview, again, this is different outside of the pandemic, but if they require interviews, sometimes they expect you to pay for some of those costs associated with those interviews. And so you want to make sure that all that has been budgeted for. And like I said, organization, organization, organization. It's just the key to keeping track of everything for each program. The application statements, I think I've touched on this, so I'm not going to be too repetitive. But again, you want to highlight the fact that you're a good fit or match for the program, sort of what sets you unique or makes you unique or sets you apart from other students who might be applying to the program in terms of your background and your experiences. Reaffirm your commitment to completing a graduate program and getting your degree. If there are weaknesses in your record, if, that's a big if it makes sense, you can address it. So if you didn't do well on a particular semester in a particular class that's important to the program because it was an 8 a.m. class and you're just not a morning person, and so you missed a lot of classes as a result, no, that's not something that you want to address, obviously. But if something happened where maybe there were health issues or somebody who was important to you had health issues or passed away and it really impacted your ability to do well in a given semester, and it's sort of a blip on your record, then I think it's okay for you to mention that there and address it. But it has to make sense, and it really has to highlight your other strengths. When you have completed your application statement, I do recommend that you take it to the Writing Center. Make sure that you've proofed it beforehand. So you want it to be in good shape already, but take it to the Writing Center, make sure that there's no grammar issues and that it's in good shape. And I even ask students, if you're willing and it's not at the last minute, think about asking a UNO professor if they would be willing to look over your statement. We've seen a ton of them. We know what good statements look like. We know what weaker statements look like. And I'm usually happy to provide a little bit of feedback to students if they want me to look over it, especially if it's for developmental programs, but as a general rule. So consider that, but that again means that you have to be working ahead to be able to get it reviewed by a professor, get it taken to the writing center, and so on. Transcripts, it takes a little bit of time to get them, so you want to request them early because you do need to provide official copies. Writing samples, you do want this to obviously be your best work within the style that's appropriate for the program that you're applying to, APA style for us. You want to consider what that best paper might be. I actually tell students probably what you did for research methods or as a paper maybe for the lab that you took, the capstone lab. Either one of those, if you've polished it and made corrections, probably is in pretty good shape. Just make sure that it conforms to APA style and then proof it, proof it, proof it. Okay, just like your statement, you want your writing sample to really be something that speaks well of you and your ability to write technically within that discipline.
On that note, also, sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead, Beth.
I had a student a few years ago that wanted to use a paper from my research methods course as her writing sample. And the first thing that she did, which I thought was really smart, with her final paper, she brought it to the writing center on campus and made an appointment with them to go through her entire paper to kind of polish it even further as a writing sample. And they helped her with some of the last things that she kind of needed to really fix up in that paper, even though it was like her final paper for the class that was like, this is the best thing that I've written so far. There's always room for improvement. So don't cut yourself short in thinking like, I turned in this paper, that's as good as it can get. Look back at it, because you've wrote that in the past, you've grown as a writer since then, you can still probably improve it even more.
Yep, absolutely right. And that's true for our writing too. We're constantly working on our writing. So definitely consider that. But since those oftentimes are classes, especially the capstone lab course, that's usually one of your last psych courses. You should have some pretty good experience under your belt for your writing, and hopefully it's in better shape than something you may have written in your first few years. If there's a personal interview, again, plan ahead for the costs. You want to make sure you dress professionally. I actually think it's not a bad idea to talk to grad students who've also maybe done some interviews and ask them about the kinds of questions that they asked. Talk to faculty about that. You can actually find some pretty good stuff online with some searches, and then visit ACDC. Those of you who are not familiar, ACDC on campus really provides some wonderful resources about interviewing, about applying for positions if you're going to take a break between undergrad and grad school. They actually will provide professional headshots. They have connections for clothing if you need more professional clothing. So they are, ACDC, by the way, is Academic and Career Development Center. So again, please do take advantage of
Magnet Career Center on Bird Street.
Sorry about that. I don't know why that just popped in, but definitely take advantage of ACDC. I would encourage you, no matter what your plans are, to make sure that you pop in there at some point before you finish so that you have a good sense of all the resources that they provide. Okay, planning ahead. Know the deadlines. Don't wait till the last minute. Maybe beating that to death a little bit, but do be aware of that and confirm that all of your materials and application documents have been received, including those letters of reference. So at least a few days before the deadline, it's okay to call and talk to someone and say, I just want to make sure that all of my application materials are in. Can you please confirm that for me? And they'll tell you what's in, what's not in, and that way you have an opportunity to follow up. Okay. In terms of funding, there's different opportunities. There's different scholarships, graduate assistant positions. Some of them are offered through the department. Some of them may be offered because a faculty member has a research grant where they're able to fund some students. And so there are a lot of different options, but you want to ask not only apart from is it available, but is it renewable? So is this something that I would have support for just my first year? Or is this something that would support me in year 2 and in year 3? And so on. So make sure that you ask about that. You can ask about those will all come with tuition remissions, but then depending on the institution, it'll come with a monthly stipend. I promise you, you will not live richly off of the monthly stipend, but the monthly stipend will vary depending on the institution. So I think at UNO it's about between $1,100 and $1,200 a month in addition to the tuition remission. So, and that's for 20 hours of work per week, which I think is pretty standard. So there are some questions relating to that, but it's okay to ask for you about those funding opportunities and whether there's other campus positions, because some of them, even though it may not come with that $1,100, $1,200 or more monthly stipend, it may come with a tuition remission. So you want to make sure that you explore all of those avenues as well. And there are some scholarships that are current now in this current pandemic environment. So at UNO, for example, for folks who are graduating in the fall, there's what they call a Jumpstart Scholarship. If you're applying to and get accepted to a graduate program at UNO, it will help to pay some of your tuition for the first semester. And the amount will depend on the number of credits that you take that semester. So there are some special opportunities that have come about because programs and institutions are trying to lure students, obviously, to attend their programs. And so sometimes there's more than what you would normally see on a programs page. Once you have applied, be patient. Okay. Typically, you'll be notified of your acceptance or rejection, or whether you've been sort of waitlisted within 8 to 12 weeks of whatever the deadline is. Sometimes, if you're accepted, you may also get information about a funding offer that comes with it. But sometimes that may come a couple of weeks later, or it's still acceptable for you to inquire about that if you're accepted, but you don't hear anything about potential funding. When you do accept or reject an offer, make sure that you do it in writing. And again, be aware of any deadlines for decisions. The national deadline is typical that most programs will use this deadline of April 15th. But if you receive in your offer letter any information that varies from that, you want to make sure that you're hitting that deadline, and again, making your acceptance or rejection in writing. And weigh your decisions carefully. So think about where you might be getting some support, and whether it's, so you might get, for example, more support at one institution that you get at another, but it's not renewable. And so you may be better off getting that or taking that renewable offer at another institution that's paying less. So just take into account all of that information. I would say you don't have to just ask faculty or other people who have good information as you are applying to programs. It's okay for you to talk to them about what you've received in terms of offers, and they can sometimes help you identify some other pros and cons that you want to consider as you think about which program makes the most sense for you. If you're rejected, it's okay for you to ask for feedback. So you might wish to reapply in the future. And persistence is important. I've seen that so many times with students who don't get accepted anywhere, maybe the first year out, but they reapply the second year or the third year, and they end up in a program that really makes a lot of sense for them and is going to help them advance their career goals. So if you don't get accepted, it's okay for you to ask for feedback and say, is there anything that I could have done that would make my application stronger if I was going to reapply? And they might say, okay, well, you might want to consider taking your GRE again and see if you can score higher on the quantitative section. Or they may say, you know, if you could take a class on research methods or another statistics class that shows us that you're in better shape for some of the graduate courses that you might take here, that would probably be a strength. And there are opportunities for you to do that as a graduate student, but not affiliated to any program. So you can do that as kind of a visiting student. For example, here at UNL, they limit the number of classes that you can take, but if it's just one or two, and they're willing to let you into those classes here, then that might make sense. So do consider getting some feedback. If you need to defer because of life situation or circumstances, that's okay, but that's something that you would want to talk with the program chair about and make sure that that's negotiated and make sure you get all of that in writing as well. But it happens, and we're usually happy to accommodate that. But you want to make sure that you're talking to us early if there are something that might keep you from coming into the program at the scheduled time, but that it's a program that you're still highly motivated to pursue in a subsequent semester or in a subsequent year. Okay. Plan Bs. Again, persistence is important. Consider reapplying in subsequent years. But again, do ask about what you might be able to do. It might be additional research or coursework or experiences. Again, taking those standardized exams again. But do talk to an advisor as well and say, you know, I got this feedback that says X, Y, or Z. What would you recommend that may help me make a stronger case for that if I reapply in the next cycle? So do consider that, and it's not the end of the world if you apply to a few different programs and you don't get accepted. Like I said, I see it almost every year where students have reapplied, and the truth is that why you don't get accepted to a graduate program may have nothing to do with you. So we might not be accepting, a faculty member might not be accepting students that particular year because they have the number of students that they feel they can support properly in their lab or that they can properly supervise. And you might know that if you call and talk to them, but if you don't, that might be a reason why you don't get accepted one year but get accepted another year. And you would have no idea about that. So there are a lot of these kinds of things that really have nothing to do with what you've put forward. And so persistence is important. If it's something that's really important to you, if it's a program that's particularly meaningful and appropriate for your goals, I would just encourage you to think about reapplying. John, did you have something you were going to add?
No, I'm just finally done with all the work so I could actually put my camera on.
Oh, okay. All right.
I
Perfect.
will jump in really quick. I was about to type this into chat. You just mentioned maybe the faculty member isn't accepting students that year, so you're rejected. If you are concerned about that at all, another thing that you can do is directly email the faculty member that you're looking to work with and see, before you even go through the whole application process, if they are accepting students that year or not.
Yep.
Juan, you mentioned earlier, like, make sure that they are still doing research that you're interested in. I always sent an email to people that I thought maybe I might want to work with and asked both of those things kind of simultaneously. Hey, are you still doing this research? I've been reading some of your work. It's been really cool to get to see kind of what you're doing in your lab. I incidentally am looking at grad school in the future during this certain semester that I wanted to start in. Are you accepting students for that semester that I should put in an application? So you're kind of like laying it all out there at once. And if they aren't accepting students, they'll tell you straight away, no, I'm not. And actually, some of them will also say, but have you heard of this program where one of my colleagues works? They're accepting students. Make sure you look at that program as well. So it might even lead you to another program that you could be a really good fit for.
That's an excellent point, Beth. And so that's one of the reasons why I have as one of my notes of encouragement is to reach out to those programs, because you get some of that information. You'll never find it on the website. But the truth is sometimes people are at capacity for their lab. Sometimes people are retiring. Sometimes people are moving from one institution to another. And you would never know that. And again, those are reasons why you might get rejected from a program that has nothing to do with you. So all of that contact matters. It can make a big difference, and you can learn some really good nuggets that will influence whether you choose to apply to that program or maybe choose to apply to another program. Okay. Join student and professional organizations. So for those of you who are already members of Psych-Hi, great for you. That's terrific, because you guys get some really good information apart from these kinds of chats. For those of you who aren't Psych-Hi members yet, you might want to stick around at the very end of this and maybe talk with Dr. Lyon. She can give you more information about the Psych-Hi chapter at UNO and what you need to do to apply. But there are also other kinds of student memberships that you can get for professional organizations, and those are sometimes helpful because they provide good information over the course of the year. And they also provide you with opportunities to learn more about different programs and to attend conferences, which I really recommend if you can swing it. You don't need to go to a national conference. Those can sometimes get expensive, although right now, because everybody's doing things virtually, you can actually attend some national conferences for a fraction of what you would pay if you were actually having to travel to some locale. But there's also state conferences. There are other local and regional conferences where you can get good information about programs. You have the opportunity to talk to students who might be presenting from those programs more informally. So it's just a good thing to do. I have a little save the date card from the Student Research and Creative Activity Fair from this past from last year, but it's always something that I recommend if you're involved in research. It's a great opportunity to present a poster or an oral presentation. It's almost always at the very beginning of March. So you can expect, beginning of March-ish, 2021, we'll have another one on campus. If you don't end up presenting at that, I still would highly recommend that you go and you take a look at what students are doing, especially if you have another year or two on campus, because you might learn some good information about potential labs that you could work with, potential faculty that you could work with. And it also just gives you a good sense of what a poster looks like, what a professional conference presentation would look like, especially because these are all done by students, undergraduate and graduate students. So really good information. I love those campus fairs. So I'd encourage you, if you haven't already been or haven't already presented, to do that.
Juan, do you mind if I jump in one more time?
No, please.
One other area that you guys could possibly get research presentation experience. Psych-Hi this year is holding a research symposium. It is, I believe, November 16th, I want to say is the date of it. You need to register for it by November 2nd. So you have about a month. And if it's like proposed research where you don't have the data collected, that's fine. It's mostly just like a sort of low-key experience that students can kind of get their foot in the door with research presenting and kind of start that train rolling. But you could still put it on your CV. Research symposium sounds pretty cool. So
it does. All those things count. All those things matter. So those campus presentations, you can add them to your CV or resume, and that's another thing that you can put forward as you're applying to programs. So take advantage of as many of those kinds of opportunities as you can. And then just some final take-home messages as we wrap things up. As you're making decisions, think beyond just the requirements that you have for graduation. Think about what you want to do when you finish, what classes make sense, what experiences make sense, so that you're in a better position once you finish to be able to move forward, whether that's in professionally within a career with your undergraduate degree, or whether that's applying to a potential graduate program, psychology or not. And then be proactive in your education, because the truth is, as much as we really like to try to publicize all of this as much as we can, there are some opportunities that just might not come your way, or that you're not aware are coming your way, unless you are being active in seeking out those kinds of opportunities. So seeking out potential research opportunities with faculty, seeking out potential work and volunteer experiences, campus presentations of the sort that we just talked about. You really want to sort of take your education in your hands and say, I am going to make the absolute most of every day that I've got as an undergraduate to really put myself in the best position that I can when I finish. I don't want it just to be the degree. That's huge. That's something to celebrate. That's something that you really want to pat yourself on the back with. But you also want to make sure that you're ready for the next step, and not just celebrating what's come behind you. So work hard towards that. It would be remiss if I didn't take off my psych hat for a moment and put on my grad studies hat and say that we have over 90 graduate and certificate programs available at UNO. Of course, I'm biased towards our psych programs because I really think highly of our psych faculty and our psych graduate programs. So definitely think UNO no matter what program you're thinking about, and take advantage of those campus resources of the sort that we've mentioned, ACDC, the research fairs, and so on, because there's so much that you can do that sometimes you just don't think about as you're thinking about everything you got to do well in your classes and to get through all of those hoops to make sure that you can finish as an undergraduate. And then I'll just encourage you, you can reach out to me through my Casas at unomaha.edu, which is my psych email. And I'm sure Dr. Santo and Dr. Lyon would also be very happy to speak with you if you have any questions about graduate school or what that process is like. But if you're interested in other programs, especially outside of psychology, the Office of Graduate Studies would also be happy to share information and connect you with other faculty too. Okay, so I will ask if folks have any last questions or comments or things that they want to get answered from, I'll say, the three of us.
I had a question come in the chat, if you don't mind taking a stab at answering this. They asked, could one shortcoming on an application, like a GPA that's slightly below the asking number, ruin a chance for acceptance, even if the other aspects of the application are above the requirements?
Yeah, obviously that's going to depend on the program that you're applying to and what their applicant pool looks like that particular year and what kind of considerations they have. But I would say, honestly, most programs are really taking that holistic approach, that holistic view of students, and know that students may be a little weaker in some areas, a little stronger in other areas. I think each program sort of comes to feel out the kinds of predictors that they have for who does well in their programs. So, for example, I can tell you that undergraduate GPA is a pretty good predictor of success in graduate school, but it's not the only one. If you are doing well on your GRE scores, especially, for example, your quantitative GRE subscale, because a lot of times students struggle with statistics classes when they get into graduate programs. And so it's not so much the content material of the different classes that are a part of the curriculum, but sometimes it's the math and statistical portion that students struggle with. So it really just depends on the program. It depends on the pool that you're applying to, and what that looks like. So I don't know that there's a hard and fast rule, but I would definitely say, be positive and apply to the programs that you're interested in applying to, that make sense, that can provide the kind of training that you're interested in and that you would need for the kind of work that you want to do on the back end. So
We had a couple other questions come in through the chat, so I'll just keep sending them to you.
keep firing
Are
away.
you less likely to get into grad school or get funding for grad school if you take a year off?
Honestly, I don't think so. Dr. Santo and Dr. Lyon, maybe if you think differently, you can chime in here as well. But I think if you have a strong record and you take a year off and you reapply with those same credentials and that same material and they accept you, they likely will still be thinking of you as a strong student that they want to attract to the program. And so what might fluctuate, for example, is the amount of graduate assistantships that might be available one year as opposed to another year. It's really kind of a hard thing to predict for any given program. So that might make a little bit of a difference, but it might be better the second year. You don't know. And so I would say if a program is accepting you and they really want you to come, I don't think if you took a year off that's really what's going to make a difference. I think if they want you, and they're going to try to attract you by offering scholarships or graduate assistantships or whatever they have at their disposal to try to attract you. So I don't think so, but Dr. Lyon or Dr. Santo, if you guys think differently, you can chime in.
Yeah, I'd love to. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you get to craft the narrative that you're putting together as part of your application. So you might, want to put your best foot forward. It completely makes sense to take a year off if that's what you feel you need to do, but you don't necessarily need to advertise, oh yeah, I wanted to, basically surf for a year. You could instead say, well, I finished my schooling and I wanted to make about attending graduate school. That sounds a little bit more serious than, no, I just wanted to have margaritas. And so, but yeah, ultimately that's the only thing I would add to that.
In truth, you may actually have a stronger application after that year off if what you're doing is taking advantage of that time to strengthen your application. So if you're getting relevant research and work experience, then when you apply that subsequent year, you may actually have a stronger profile than what you did coming out of undergrad. So I think it doesn't, I don't think it makes a big difference, but I think you want to make sure that when you do take that time off, you're making the most of it and trying to strengthen your profile as much as possible.
We had another question come in asking if double majoring could hurt your chances of grad school if you pick to further one major rather than the other. My experience with this is absolutely not. You can not even necessarily have a bachelor's degree in the same field that you want to go into in grad school. It's more so in how you present your case, kind of like Dr. Santo was saying, and how you describe what it is that you want to do moving forward from that. So if you have a psych bachelor's degree and you want to go into a neuroscience program, make your case for why you want to do that in the future. And as long as it's a strong, compelling case, you're going to be considered just with all of the other applicants, regardless of what your bachelor's degree is in. If you were going from like English to neuroscience, there might be a few questions like, why the switch? But they would still take you seriously if you put a compelling case forward, I would say.
I agree with everything you just said.
And I mean, it's also the people reviewing these applications understand that not everyone has decided at 18 exactly what they want to do for their entire lives, and have, as a result, crafted and made every decision towards that end. And so it's normal to grow, and it's normal to change. And the only other thing I'll add is that for me, I love it when we have students from different backgrounds in our graduate program, because they bring that different perspective, and it allows for cross-pollination of ideas. It really can be.
Yeah, definitely. We had some more questions if you guys are willing to stick around and answer some more.
Definitely, yeah, keep them coming.
One student asks, how can we explore various grad programs and universities outside of UNO? Is there a common resource or a website for this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's different ways of getting to information and programs. I think there's the straightforward way, which is I just want to do a search of, let's say, APA accredited programs in clinical psych. And you will find lists of all of those programs in clinical psychology, or whatever, cognitive, whatever the area is. You'll find that information. You can also talk to faculty, and you can say, I have interest in X, Y, and Z. And that's what I really want to focus on when I'm in graduate school. And if they are aware of specific programs where you can get good training in that. So I'll throw out developmental, because I actually think developmental is a really good example of it. Developmental covers a wide amount of ground, right? Because you have to know about social development, emotional development, language development, cognitive development, neuroscience, and so on. And so for programs that aren't huge, it's impossible for them to have faculty that are going to have expertise in all of those different domains of development. And so what you have to do is sort of look at those programs, look at those faculty, look at their research interests, and say, okay, this is a program that has 4 or 5 different faculty members, but 3 of those 4 seem to have cognitive interests. So if I went to this program, I probably would be getting a lot of cognitive training, in addition to some other foundational training as well across the different areas. But in terms of research and opportunities, it's going to be sort of bent towards cognitive. And so that's why you want to do your homework, and you really want to research the programs and the information that you can get. And as I mentioned during the talk, the other thing that I think is really helpful is actually doing literature searches on the topics that appeal to you the most. You are not writing that in stone, as I think Dr. Santo mentioned. I actually remember what I wrote on my 1 to 2 page statement when I was applying to graduate programs, and I never did 1 day of that in graduate school. I've never done 1 day of that actually beyond graduate school. So it isn't written in stone, but it is a good place to start identifying programs and faculty that are doing work in the areas that are of particular interest to you. So if you sort of work backwards like a detective, when you start finding those journal articles, they'll have the institutional affiliations for those authors. Then you can do a Google search of those programs and see if A, they're still there, and B, if they're still active in those particular areas. Do they describe themselves as having research expertise and conducting work in those areas? Does the curriculum sort of, what does the curriculum reflect? And so I think there's a lot of ways of getting at that kind of information. And the nice thing is none of that kind of stuff was really there when I was coming out and starting to apply to grad programs. I was literally licking stamps and sending snail mail to faculty and hoping they would respond to me. There was email. I'm not that old, but it certainly, you don't have the same kind of widespread information that you have at your disposal and at your fingertips now. So I think there's quite a few ways of getting at that information, and you don't need to do it all on your own. You can talk with other folks and they can give you some good tips.
All right, we have some more questions that came in. A student wanted to know if they're involved in a research lab during their undergrad career, can they continue to remain involved after graduating, possibly before grad school, in that specific lab? My response to this would be it's very lab specific, what projects you're working on, what qualifications you need to be working in the lab. Some labs that work with children, I imagine, are a lot more strict in who can interact with them and what sort of checks need to be in place, like background checks and all of that sort of stuff. Mostly, if you are already getting some rapport in that research lab, I would imagine that they would be delighted to have you stick on for the following summer or the following year in a volunteer sort of capacity. But that's sort of just my take on it. Either of you two have something to add to that?
I think that's true. You know, one of the things that we like in our research labs is stability. So where we can get folks to commit to multiple semesters, and if that means it extends beyond your undergraduate career and into that summer, maybe between undergraduate and grad school, that's okay. I tend not to mind that at all. But it may, as Dr. Lyon said, it may depend on the particular research program and might, you know, what some of the requirements and issues might be for the populations that you might be working with. So I think it depends, but I think in most cases it's probably okay.
Another question that we have here, a student wants to know, should I prioritize programs that do the exact kind of research I want to do, or should I look at faculty, the school, etc.? I would say it's kind of a balance between those two. Definitely you want to find somebody that is already doing research very similar to what you're interested in, because that will make it feel like you are collaborating and you'll be able to have ideas kind of just because you're interested in it. It'll make it a lot easier to actually stick with it. But both are still important.
Yeah.
Another question from a student, they said, I'm graduating this year and admittedly my GPA isn't where I want it to be. If I don't get accepted for 2021, am I able to take additional coursework after I graduate? Do you guys know the answer to that?
You can take additional coursework, but I believe you have to reapply if you're not going to be affiliated with a program as sort of a non-affiliated student. So, but again, there's limitations on the number of classes that you can take. And I don't know that if you're taking graduate level classes, that's not going to help your GPA, because now you're looking at establishing a graduate GPA. If you're taking additional undergraduate classes, I'm actually not 100% sure. The problem is that once you've accumulated 120 plus credits, if you get, say, an A or a high B in 1 or 2 additional classes, it's not going to move your GPA, that needle, like a ton. And so I think there's a couple of things that you could do. One is try to balance it out with doing as well as you can on the placement exams, in trying to get as much work and volunteer and research experience, demonstrating in other ways that you really are motivated to pursue graduate training in a particular area, and that you are putting in the time and putting in the work because you just feel a high degree of commitment to it. That doesn't guarantee that you'll get into programs that you're applying to. You'll want to take into consideration maybe what median GPAs and GREs are for different programs. But I think I don't think you should be discouraged from applying to graduate programs. Again, if you are weaker in one area and can balance that out with strengths in other areas. You get to write the narrative, as Dr. Santos said, and I think a lot of it is in how you frame things.
The only other thing that I would have to add about that, and you guys have been here longer than I have, so correct me if I'm wrong. I believe if there's like specific classes that you did really poorly in, you can retake them and change the grade. Is that right?
It is, but I'm not sure. The key, I think, is once you graduate.
Okay.
So you can have everything that you need to graduate and just keep taking classes, keep taking classes, keep taking classes, and nobody's going to stop you because you have to file for graduation. So you could accumulate 150 credits if you wanted to. And as long as you have everything that you need for the degree, it just depends on what semester you want to file for graduation. But I think once you've filed for graduation and graduated, then I think it becomes a little bit of a different question.
Yeah. Okay, we
And
got
can I-
another question here, and I believe this is our last one. So thank you
Can I
for,
jump in on?
you're headed out?
No, I think Jonathan
No,
has.
no, can I jump in?
Oh yeah, sorry, go
You
ahead.
know, I was just going to say, ultimately, retaking these classes is a very sort of expensive way of trying to improve your overall transcript. And I think there's sort of more directed ways that you can sort of make yourself look more appealing or appear like a stronger candidate. Especially if you know where you want to apply and who you want to work with, you can develop that rapport in advance. And as long as you meet the minimal requirements for the application for that particular program, then it ends up being the ultimate decision of the advisor if they're willing to supervise you. And having a low GPA might not be a deal breaker for someone if they've gotten to know you and know that this is a responsible person. And so I'll just give one example. During my undergrad, I got a D plus in my statistics class. It's a whole thing. There's reasons for it. But I was also, working with a faculty member that I wanted to apply to work with during graduate school. And so over the course of the summer, I read every single stats textbook I possibly could. And this advisor saw that I was working hard on it. And so the fact that I had this bad grade in this one class didn't end up being an issue because they knew that, I was able to take that, bad grade and work to improve it. And I think that probably went farther than if I just tried to retake that stats class.
Dr. Santo now teaches a lot of our stats classes, by the way. But the other thing that I just cued in my memory is that sometimes you can get what's called a provisional acceptance, where a program will say, okay, we're gonna provisionally accept you, but before you can start the program, we want you to take a certain class. And if that's the case, then it makes more sense to put in the time and the money to take those classes, knowing that you'll be able to begin the graduate program after that.
Anything else from you guys before I cut you off again? No, okay. Our last question from the students here: do grad programs look more kindly towards students who double major for additional experiences, or more to those who focus and perfect their one major? Any comment on that from either of you guys?
To be honest with you, I think personally, it probably depends a little bit on how well those majors complement each other. So if they are wildly disparate majors, then I might, but the odds are that's not happening. The odds are that's probably not happening if that's where your interests lie. I don't know that I give it any additional weight per se, but certainly it's a positive if I see somebody who's got maybe a neuroscience major and a psychology major, and they're really interested in again, I'll just do developmental because that's my program. they're interested in exploring neuroscience type questions within a developmental program, then that's a nice sort of balance across those two majors. But I don't necessarily think that I would judge one stronger than another if one had a little bit weaker GPA, but it was a double major. I don't think that would necessarily balance out. I don't know if that helps, but I don't know. John, do you have a different take on that?
No, really. I mean, all that all makes sense, and you know what we've touched on. You can frame exactly why you did it. If you had a passion for these two different majors, you know, that's to be commended. You know, that you pursued what your interests are. That speaks to dedication. That speaks to initiative that you want to see in a student. So I think it all depends on the reasons behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree.
And I don't think that anybody would be saying, oh, you only had one major. Oh, for shame, not gonna even look at you. So it really is just you telling your story of why you belong in that program, and kind of how you got there. So
yeah, we do look at people's transcripts, by the way, so it's not just whether you have a double major, but what were the classes that you took overall and how you performed in the ones that we think are most pertinent to the program.
awesome. Well, if everybody would please join me in thanking both Doctors Juan and John here today. Thank you guys so much. This was a whole lot of help for our students. I really, really appreciate you guys taking the time to talk with us tonight. So thank you so much. And once this recording is all put together, it'll probably be sometime between 24 and 48 hours based on how slow Zoom is. It will be posted on our group Canvas page. So if you had to tune out for a minute or two, or you wanted to re-listen to some of the answers that they gave about anything that we talked about today, feel free to watch the recording, share it with all your friends, tell everybody that you know. And I hope that all of you guys have a great rest of your night.
Good
Thanks,
to see you
everyone.
all. It was a pleasure. Thanks
Thank you
for
so
the
much.
invitation, Beth.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that was.
Bye, guys.
It was.
Take
Yeah.
care.
Have a good night.